Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the COVID special series of the webinar series that we have here at the Ball State Center for Professional Selling. I am your host, Deva Rangarajan. And in keeping with all the wonderful people that I've had a chance to share the screen with, today we have Professor Vamsi Kanuri from Notre Dame, who also recently just got nominated by Poets and Quants of 40 under 40. It means that great academics under 40 years old. So not only is he young, but he's extremely smart. So I just thought it would be wonderful for us to have a conversation. But more importantly, it is the topic that he's working on that I think is of interest. The last two sessions that we had, one was with a professor from Italy, Professor Paolo Guenzi, where he talked about how salespeople now have to have more digital skills, even though they used to be in face-to-face, but how would they communicate with their customers? And how should they become omni-channel in their approach? How could they use different tools, digital tools, during these difficult times? And it becomes more important, not just because we have to deal with these times, but also what is going to happen after COVID settles down is we need to become much more omni-channel as salespeople in our approach. But of course, when you come up and using omni-channel, you need to have content. And that's where Professor Mantrala last week was sharing his insights about marketing and sales have to work together to come up with the right kind of content that makes sense for my customers. And salespeople should then know what is the best way to leverage these content and what is the best possible channel by which we would communicate this. And when would we do this? And that lends itself very well to the research of Professor Kanuri, who has a wonderful article in a journal of marketing, which is a top journal for marketeers, which has been picked up as well by other outlets, where he talks about specifically scheduling content on social media and how they've gone about trying to come up with a theory, make sure that they have evidence to back it up. So Professor Kanuri, after that long introduction, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Hey, Deva, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Vamsi, so one of the things which I really found interesting is, yes, the context of your paper was using social media to put content and then get your typical B2C, business to consumer kind of customers. But before we get into B2B, B2C, tell us a little bit more about that particular research.
Sure, absolutely. So, the research was conducted within the context of newspapers. It was a newspaper firm, and my association with newspapers goes back to, gosh, I don't know, 10 years back, when I first started working with newspapers and, trying to help them get out of the deep troubles, they've been in. And my dissertation, slowly I was able to crystallize, those problems and come up with, some problems that would be good for my dissertation. So my dissertation happened to be on optimizing a menu of subscription plans that is coming up with multi-channel subscription plans and pricing them optimally. And once we published that research, the word got around at the firm, and one of the departments said, "Hey, this is cool. If you're able to come up with optimization algorithms and fine-tune our operations, could you also do that with our social media?" And at that time, social media marketing was not as sophisticated as it is today. So now we have a lot of tools, in place and algorithms, machine learning algorithms, especially, that are able to identify, sound bits that are catchy and that might actually get you more engagement, user engagement on social media. At that time, it was not that advanced. So a couple of my colleagues, one of them happened to be a former student of my, advisor. He's now a professor at A&M. His name is Dr. Hari Sridhar. And then his student, in a few months, he's going to be my colleague at Notre Dame, Yixing Chen. He defended his dissertation. Now he's going to be joining our university here. The three of us got together and said, well, let's look at this problem from a more scientific manner. So can we come up with a way in which we can schedule content so we can draw more people towards it? Are there some times in the day when people are naturally more interested in consuming content? Are there times in the day when certain types of content are more popular? These were some of the lingering questions. And so the first thing we did was we went back to the social media manager and said, hey, we would like to know how you schedule content and post content on your social media channels. By the way, even 10 years ago, the firm was using a whole lot of channels to post their content. There was a dedicated social media manager, which was quite impressive for the newspaper industry that still struggles with having resources for these sort of, in their mind, discretionary activities, right? So, but anyhow, so when we went back, we were very surprised to hear that the social media manager at that time was following some rules of thumb. Like, for example, since this was a newspaper company, they were mostly posting sports news, for example, in the mornings. They thought, again, anecdotally, they thought that sports news would attract a lot of visitors and would get them a lot of likes, clicks, and things. Now, if you understand the business model of newspapers, they were trying to direct traffic to their websites. They were using social media to get as many people to engage with it. So when they engage with it, some of them, hoping that some of them would naturally get interested in that content and would then go to the newspaper's website to actually consume it. Right? So the link clicks was a very, very important metric for them. So it's in some sense KPI, right? So key performance index. Because once the reader actually went to their website, they would actually get ad revenue. So advertisers would pay for the impressions. So the more you drive traffic, the more you would make on the advertising revenue side. So they were really interested in this. And for some reason, they thought sports news would be really popular in the morning, and they would ad hocly pick posts to boost. So boosting is where on Facebook, for example, you would promote your content so it reaches outside of your fan base. So which means it'll maximize your reach with the hope that it'll actually bring back some revenue, more revenue.
Absolutely.
So they had all these rules of thumb, and we are human beings, right? So how many rules of thumb can you have? Like how many anecdotal, strategies? I mean, they were literally taking down points and making note of points or strategies that actually worked for them the last week, because they couldn't go back farther in time because it would just be so many strategies, right? And then we said, well, this is great that you're doing these and you're on top of things, but then we regrouped as a team, research team, and then we said, can we improve this? Is there any way? Can we come up with a scientific algorithm, sort of, that would actually maximize firms' ad revenue? That is through driving traffic. Then we started looking at different types of content. And one of the things we found, we used a full years of social media posts from this newspaper firm's dedicated Facebook page. So we had about, if I remember it correctly, about 4,700 posts or 5,700 posts, those numbers. So it was a decent sample. And then we looked at heterogeneity in terms of, are there characteristics that actually that get firm more engagement? And what we started finding very quickly is negative information got really a lot of attention in the morning. I mean, even before we go into the content characteristics, let me also highlight that we generally found that people consume content, more content in the morning. Right? People consume more content in the morning, and even within that content, negative content or high emotion content, let me put it that way, because there could also be positive content that's high arousal content, right? Very happy content or deeply negative content could also be highly arousing. So we found that high arousal content to be really popular in the morning. And we also found that stories that needed a lot of cognitive resources. These are deep stories where one had to sit down and think about it and read through it and all that. They were really popular in the afternoon. This was a second finding. The third finding was boosted posts, which is, again, spending money to boost stories, would bring in a lot of engagement in the afternoons. Then we started looking at these patterns, and post hoc, we started thinking about, what could be driving these patterns. And after quite a bit of thinking and looking into cognitive psychology and looking into how consumers process information at what times of the day, it became really clear that the results actually aligned very well with circadian rhythms and the availability of working memory. So humans, consumers have working memory where they actually process information. This is the active memory. This is short-term memory where we process content, right, in order to engage with. So after processing, I mean, depending on the outcome of the processing, we either engage with some content or don't engage with content. And what we found was, the availability of working memory actually could explain all of these results. So in the morning, usually, if you're a normal person with a normal circadian rhythm, I know, Deva, you're probably not. You're
but still, each of us have idiosyncrasies, right? So that's absolutely right. No, but I think it's fascinating that the circadian rhythms and the way you look at it as well. Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
So so if you had more working memory, if users have more working memory, they're able to naturally process more content in the morning. So which is why we were seeing that news stories were getting a lot of clicks in the morning because people wanted to consume that news. However, as the day progressed, again, if you're a normal person with a normal sleep-wake pattern, you would naturally take on more tasks as the day progresses, which means the working memory availability sort of shrinks. Right. So we have this amazing mechanism, and it has been established quite well in the chronopsychology literature, that when working memory availability shrinks, our brain naturally prioritizes content that is especially important to us, that we want to actually read and spend time on. Right. So which is why, if a person really likes a story, the deep stories actually were more popular in the afternoon when the working memory was really availability was low. So it was focusing. So consumers are able to spend a lot of their cognitive resources, available cognitive resources, on a story, and they're able to deeply process content. Right. And the third result that we found, which is boosted content, is popular in the afternoon, could also be explained by working memory, because, as the day progresses, like I just said, the working memory availability goes down.
It goes down indeed, yeah.
So in order for someone to actually recognize that the content is relevant for them, you need sort of a signal, an external signal. So your attention could actually be focused on that content, right? To draw the attention of a consumer. And boosting, by definition, when you boost, you'll have to select some parameters in order to reach your potential target consumers. Right? So in the afternoons, it was more effective when people had low working memory. So all of these really fit well. It was a challenge to come up with a theory that would fit all of these results, and we were able to, of course, rationalize our findings and also convince 4 other people at a journal that these findings are accurate. But very importantly, once we were able to do this, the newspaper still wanted to figure out how they can automate it, right? So, I mean, it's hard for a social media manager to say, well, if it's a negative content, what is the exact value I should be looking at? Should it be this? Should this percentage of the content be negative and all that? So for that, what we did was we took our econometric model and then we built an optimization framework. Now, with the advancements in social media scheduling, now you have a lot of tools or a lot of software that will tell you the negativity in a content or positivity in a content once you actually put in the message, right? So you don't even have to post it, but within a second, you'll know the amount of negative, what the slant of your content is, right? So assuming that you have all of these inputs, we've designed an algorithm which went through billions of combinations with a B, right? So because if you divide your day into half an hour slots, you have 48 slots, and depending on the stories that you want to post, it's 48C something, and then in terms of mathematical combinations, and then if you also want to boost certain number of stories with a budget constraint, it becomes a really complex combinatorial optimization problem to solve, which normal heuristics, brute force methods cannot solve. So we had to adopt a genetic algorithm based optimizer. We came up with this optimizer, and we actually couldn't test it live because, of several reasons. When it comes to implementation, things are a bit slow. But what we were able to do was we were able to hold some part of our data, as a holdout sample. And we built our model on the training sample and then implemented the results on the holdout sample. And we saw what the lift would have been, because we were able to observe the outcomes of the holdout sample. Our algorithm predicted, how many links it would have gotten if we changed the schedule of the posted content. And then we projected the advertising revenue. And we were able to predict about a 7%, 5 to 7% increase, depending on the different scenarios we looked at. We were able to predict that sort of a lift in gross profits.
And here is where it's fascinating for me, because even though your target audience was a newspaper reaching out to a B2C kind of customers, here is where I saw a lot of parallels to the situations that companies, B2B companies that I have a chance to interact with face. Let's start with the beginning, saying that you said in this particular newspaper organization, social media did not necessarily have a lot of budget.
Right.
In most B2B organizations, I'm now not talking about those born in the cloud kind of companies, which probably understand the importance of marketing. But in most B2B companies which I have a chance to interact with, marketing is an afterthought, let alone social media marketing. So I think it's fascinating about the budgetary part, which is why I think it's very, very important. What you're saying is that it does not really matter where you are. It all matters on how much importance you give to it. That is what I think is more important there. That's where I should draw the parallels to what we can do in B2B. The second thing, which I think is very, very interesting, is the fact is that in today's conditions, because of COVID, now I can easily substitute social media. At the end of the day, what we're fighting for is that minute or a minute and a half or 2 minutes of the mind of that individual to pay attention to what we're trying to say, be it through social media or be it through personal messaging. So I can easily translate this into, if my marketing team has to come up with a messaging, if you can post it on social media, or these days you have these new tools like marketing automation, things like that, where I can even send a targeted message to a particular customer. And I think from that perspective, it'll be interesting to see whether that message will have a bigger impact. What kind of message will have a bigger impact if you send it in the morning as against in the afternoon, based on the findings that you have. Because at the end of the day, it is going to go to an individual, and he or she or they have to say whether they want to use their valuable resource to actually spend time looking at it as well. So here is where I think a lot of salespeople need to start understanding that if they have to reach out to their either prospects or their customers, they need to actually start thinking about when is the best time to reach out, rather than just saying, I'm going to go with some kind of heuristic. I think there's also a lot of impact saying that if marketing is saying we do not want to bother our salespeople to generate leads, we are going to use social media to be generating leads. Marketing should be smart about saying when they should be spending money, because you just said that I only have so limited budget to be spending. So essentially, I should be saying, when should I be sending the message to what kind of profiles of people? And of course, there's always this level of complication in B2B, saying that it's not one person making a decision, but what you need is one person being convinced that you or your organization has something interesting to offer.
Right.
And essentially, for me to draw the parallel is when you say, when they go click on that particular link that goes to your website to create revenue, in this case, it may not be revenue, but it could be that prospect where my salesperson need not have taken the effort
Right.
to have reached out, and I've just increased the number of leads, which of course have to be qualified. That I understand, right? But at least you had a person who's shown some interest to do enough to click on that link. So here is where I draw the pen. That is why it absolutely fascinates me, this idea of circadian rhythms. And here is why I really wanted to talk to you, because we can talk forever. But in the interest of time, I only have two other things that I would like to ask. And I just want, based on your response, I would want to try and see if we can translate that to a B2B context. Is you talked about the content type. Now, did you specifically say whether you would have a differential impact if it's a short video, or you know what I mean, or if it is actually news worded stuff? You know what I mean? Did you actually do any kind of distinction between a video as against a text-based messaging?
That's a good question. And in this project, we primarily look at text. We
Yeah.
do control for whether the text it was accompanied by an image.
Yeah.
I don't think we actually controlled for videos at all. So
Yeah.
that would be a completely different research question.
Okay.
Um,
But it's interesting. But what would your thoughts be on that? Because would you say that images or videos might trigger higher arousal than actually just text?
it's an interesting point, because I have some ongoing work on images and videos. The key difference is the level of involvement.
Yeah.
Right? So with text, it's quick. People are able to process it quickly. With videos, it's a little deeper, right?
Yeah.
So most videos now, I think, are a minute long. And if you, I guess it depends on how quickly you convey your message and how engaging you convey that message, right? That remains an empirical question. But it'll, to be honest, I don't know what the answer is going to be.
But it's fine.
In terms of when videos will actually go viral. Again, like I said, it's an empirical question. But I also want to quickly comment on something you just said about the alignment between sales and marketing. Right? Very quickly, if you have time. I think it poses an additional layer of complexity that compared to the problem that we dealt with in the B2C domain, because when marketers are posting messages in the B2B world, they want to maximize the impact, and in order to maximize the impact, they'll not only have to align their messages with their target audience, which happens to be decision makers or key informants, whoever that informant is, but they should also align that with what salespeople are doing. Yeah. So, researchers have dealt with this issue in great detail in the offline world. That is how closely marketing and sales departments need to work together in order to maximize, in order to minimize leakage of leads and maximize impact. But in the online world, this creates new opportunities for sales and marketing departments to work together in order to cumulatively maximize the impact of communication between the buyer and the seller.
I think so. I think this is what is, for me, is why it's really fascinating, because if I just strip down, and this is not my intention, consider this as a layman's person of trying to understand a very smart person, smart people doing this research, is what I understand is that in a B2B context, you could have marketing sending out messaging through normal social media. Right. You could also have salespeople coordinated messaging to targeted people that they want to reach out to, and see whether this level of coordination could lead to much higher efficiencies and much higher returns.
Yes.
where we coordinate saying that if marketing says we're going to be posting videos in the afternoon, which is going to create much more, because if it triggers a lot more working memory for people to work on it, and then salespeople do something similar with there. Essentially, what you're trying to do is that you're trying to have a similar approach where we're going to get maximum bang for the buck.
Right.
And in the morning, we're going to do this, and salespeople just need to push the content from marketing. Then it'll be interesting to see whether that kind of alignment has a bigger impact on your outcomes. And
Yeah.
that I think for me is absolutely fascinating. And for any practitioner watching this who controls, who's interested in doing this within their own organizations, reach out to us because yes, Dr. Kanuri is an academic, but it may not look like it, but I also do try to do some research. And these are the kind of topics that we also try to understand, because salespeople need that help in B2B context. Any help they can do to get and reach out to those customers is what I think is extremely critical. And in
In the B2C, drawing some parallels, there's been some work in the advertising domain where people have looked at the effects of reinforcement, message reinforcement, repeat
absolutely.
advertisements, right? So essentially, we are trying to get at that. But in B2B context, it's interesting because the channels through which you reinforce the message and the sources through which you reinforce the message are different, right? So marketing and sales teams are trying to reinforce using different communication strategies
Absolutely.
and different channels.
Indeed.
Right? So,
and I think that's the beauty of it, because one of the things that is an area that I'm working on is called sales enablement, where the word sales enablement, the ultimate outcome of sales enablement is how can marketing and sales organizations, management work towards getting the right information to the right customer by the right salespeople at the right time. If that is what sales enablement is, what you just described, Vamsi, Professor Kanuri, is exactly that. Is we need to have a coordinated approach, because heaven forbid that what you promise through your marketing campaigns differs from what the salespeople are communicating with the customers, could lead to a gap, which in today's day and age could be detrimental in a customer saying they can't get their act together. How can I trust to work with them to actually help solve my problems? And I think that is what I think is very, very interesting out here. And I just want to close with something, which is I would strongly suggest all of you to try, and if you get a chance to read the paper by Dr. Kanuri, because one of the things he talks about, which we don't have time to talk about, which is also very, very interesting here, is they talk about also the targeted content. You need to have a targeted content that you need to do, which in a B2B context would mean that, hey, if you're going to have 6.8 people involved in a customer's decision-making unit, the question is, what is the kind of content you're going to do out there to trigger people to say, should I be spending time on this? So you need to even target the content per member of the decision-making unit. And this is where marketing cannot do it without the support of salespeople to, first of all, generate the right kind of content, and two, reach out to that kind of content as well and get it reinforced by your sales team. So I think on that high note, I would really like to thank Professor Kanuri for taking the time to talk to us in the audience. It is, in my opinion, an excellent piece of work, which I think we in B2B can draw a lot from. And I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
hey, thanks, Deva. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and now it's even more pleasure to actually be on your show.
Hey,
So
thanks.
thank you for featuring and
Thanks.
my research.
Thanks.